I think it's kind of special because it feels like it is a kid's space. Most other spaces, children are visitors too, except for their bedroom. They're kind of like, yes, you're allowed to come shopping if you behave yourself. You're allowed to, be at the dinner table, whatever. All these things like an event or they come as well as, but I feel like play spaces should feel like they're owned by children and the parents are visiting.
Hello, welcome back to Ready to Redo. Today we're unpacking something people rarely stop to think about, and that's the planning and designing behind children's play spaces. In Sydney, I visited the Ian Potter Children's Wild Play Garden in Centennial Park and knew I had to interview the people behind it. Today we're joined by Louise Pearson, Studio Director at Aspect Studios, which is a team of landscape architects, designers and urbanists, and who was a core architect who was part of the project. We talk about the play garden's history, purpose, and intentions. It is a juicy topic, so let's jump into it.
I found it randomly when I was in Sydney, just walking around on my Maps app and just found this play garden and thought, why the hell not? Well, why the hell not? I'm on holiday and this is the thing that I get up to on my holidays, and found myself in this beautiful play garden, which we'll put some pictures in for our video, so YouTube audience, because it is actually quite incredible. So I'd love to know actually if you could give a brief context around this play garden, where it started, how it started and came to be.
Yeah, well, as you said, it's quite a large play space within Centennial Parkland. So lovely ponds and things in this massive park in Sydney. It's kind of like our sort of central park, as it were, which is tied to an educational centre, which is all around teaching kids how to interact with nature. And a lot of First Nations contributions as well. So it's really about, how to use particular plants and things for medicinal use, but also just how to be comfortable and embrace a natural setting. So we started this project sort of spurred by them. There is a lovely rolling hill that leads down to the education centre, and it's a little bit hidden off the big track that runs around Centennial Park. But it was a space that they saw as had potential to be much more. So we were pretty excited. There was a competition that was announced. We put in an expression of interest to say that we'd love to do it. We were shortlisted and we went on to win the competition. So that was quite a process to begin with.
Wow. Yeah. And what was that process like?
So what happens usually is you might get maybe 3 to 5 firms. I think we had 4 in this instance that get given a brief. We knew it was about wild play. So the ability of kids to really get messy and be immersed in nature. So it was a great brief to start with. It wasn't about, what off the shelf pieces of equipment can we use. It was all about how do I create something quite transformative in this space. So you get a brief and then you usually have sort of maybe 4 or 5 weeks to come up with some ideas and draw lots of pictures and think about the vision for the site. You produce some drawings and that's evaluated in the end, usually with a presentation.
For those of you on YouTube, I'm just inserting a few images that Aspect sent through from their initial plans back in 2014. And as you can see, just insanely creative and imaginative and amazing.
And they're always fun because it's generally, you're quite free. You have a brief, but you don't have to necessarily have lots of meetings with the client at that point. So you'll find everyone gets very excited. And we did.
So initially, what sort of examples of things from the brief did they provide to you?
I think it was more like this was quite a while ago, we'll have to acknowledge. So it was about 2014 when we got the briefs. The aspirations were about connecting to the education centre. It was about what could the kids do in between or after a lesson. How could we kind of keep them here for a day and they'd be happy? to play. So part of it was that this playground did need to be fenced. So we've woven within and hidden behind planting quite a lovely fence, which does mean that when a parent comes with a child to Wild Play, or if they've got a group of students that are coming out of this education centre, they can kind of leave them in there and not be helicopter like.
Right.
So it was, that encouraged a different kind of approach. And then it was just really about responding to the natural environment. There wasn't a huge amount. It was when we saw the site, we all got incredibly excited. We work not far from Centennial Park, so it was an incredibly easy thing to go and visit and imagine the space.
And how did both, I guess they were pitching this idea of wild play. So how did you interpret that idea of wild play?
Yeah, the way that we saw it was this just perfect opportunity to get a bit messy, to allow planting to do more than it normally does. And the gift of this site is that we had a bunch of horticulturalists who were really passionate about looking after and actually planting all of the plants, certainly looking after them in the future. It was a group, a Centennial Park group and Botanic Gardens group, who were very keen on looking after those plants. So we knew we could get away with a whole lot of greenery that you really couldn't do as easily in a council park, for example. So there was kind of permission to plant, and there was the support systems that were going to make sure that thrived. So they're two pretty good conditions. And then the way we approach the space is to make it full of discovery. So it's a pretty simple plan, but when you're in it, you really don't know where you're about to go. So there's a sort of zigzag that runs through the site, and we made it deliberately such that when you enter through the gate, you're hit with these what seems like prehistoric plants. They're all kind of looking over you, and they're kind of creepy and strange and, spiky and weird.
I did feel that, yes. When I walked in too, we were both just like, what is going on here? It's sort of like a Jurassic Park-esque feeling.
Yeah. And that was very deliberate. It was like, no, when you get here, you've got to start going, what the hell is going on? So that was perfect that you felt that. And then you sort of sneak around the corner and you discover there's a Banksia tunnel. And then you sneak around the corner a bit more and you hear the sound of water. And then you sneak around a bit more and you see the treehouse, huge timber structure, which the conception of it was designed almost like a bunch of rogue children / insects, if they were supersized, might have created this thing. So very bespoke structure. And you keep sneaking around, and all of a sudden then there's a tunnel that leads through to a sand pit. Sneak around a bit more and you find some of the beautiful existing trees. When a space is successful, you want to go back multiple times, and we were really keen to make sure that wasn't all just presented for you as soon as you walked in. You really had to kind of find your space, and it's worked quite well, I think, in that sense.
Yeah, because you've really, I had a question about that, really, that you've already started to answer, which is what sort of play were you intending for the children to have? And it sounds like to me, a sense of discovery, a sense of not knowing and figuring out as you go, especially for the first time you walk in. I mean, maybe the 10th time, they'd probably just treat it like their home. But the first time, it's like what's around the bend. Yeah. And so if you could paint a picture of the landscape, but how would you sort of describe the different parts of them?
Yeah. There are a few key kind of zones, I guess you'd say. And sort of as I described, there's the entry sequence, which is this prehistoric kind of landscape. There's the Banksia scrub, which is a whole series of little tunnels. They're kind of they're arched over Banksias, joined together, and then complemented with a project by Cave Urban where they used bamboo as a weaving structure and made sort of tunnels. And because the site isn't flat, sort of start up high and you work your way down. Then there's the treehouse, which is kind of one of the features of the site, and usually the iconic bit that gets the most publicity. But it is quite a destinational piece with a big slippery dip and a kind of nest-like quality. There's the water play, which is based on a concept about the Great Artesian Basin, which is this huge aquifer, which is under a huge amount of Australia that most people don't know about, and it pops up water in all different ways. You'll notice if you go that there's all sorts of different blobby ways the water makes its appearance. There's a bit of misting and some bubbles that pop up in puddles, and so it's sort of talking about the way that water feeds its way through landscape. And there's a thing we call the turtle, which is a mounded space, and it's got planting all over it, and a kind of tunnel that becomes like the turtle head that pops through it. And that, like, if you had a tiny little kid who was a bit nervous, or who just loved the scent of things, and who just wanted to touch, that might be where they start. That might be their introduction to the site. And you can climb through this quite long tunnel. I remember when we first put it in, we were like, oh my God, is that too long? But it's amazing. Anything you worry about with kids, like 2 minutes later, they're all in there.
Yeah.
And I go through this tunnel and then end up in a sand pit. And then there's a big timber structure again at the bottom, which is called the eel. And that's inspired by an eel which actually starts on site at Centennial Park, and to mate goes to like French Polynesia and comes back through somehow through all the sewer systems and the water systems in a miraculous fashion. So there's that thing. There's a sort of another kind of zone which is a little bit more informal, and there's lots of places where school groups and things can sit as well.
Yeah, wow. What I'm picking up from what you're saying is that with this variety in the play garden, you have a lot of opportunities for a variety of kids to discover their own sense of play. So you have some who are sort of maybe a bit daunted by the big playground structure and might not be the ones to jump on it initially. I mean, the tunnel did actually freak me out a little bit too, because it was really long. Yeah, I do agree.
I thought it was too long.
Yeah, and yeah, you just see the kids like jumping through and being like, oh, pish posh. This is like so fine to me.
Yeah.
And then you've also got those shrubs and nature where I saw kids just sitting there and sort of poking the ground and sort of having like a little meeting place almost, just chilling out. And so it seems like there is a lot of opportunities for the kids to, experiment with what they're comfortable with first before jumping into something else.
Absolutely.
And with this, then, if we were to draw back to the initial planning, because all of this, I guess, was developed now and after you got the go-ahead and to be chosen. But initially, when you had that brief and you were working with just not set in stone ideas, what were your main priorities to start with?
I think a sense of discovery was pretty big. For us, like, we're landscape architects, it's a pleasure to work with plants. You don't always get this sort of project as a gift to you. There are a lot of practical things you have to consider in like urban context, and this was a bit of a gift in that sense. So we wanted to really celebrate the planting, so to make it a proper feature. And for us, it's habitat and thinking about it in terms of how it can construct experiences, like how a place smells. Often sound is something that's completely overlooked. But for example, the climbing structure, the big tower, is immersed in bamboo. And the sound is incredible. The sense of discovery for that sort of thing, they were there from the very beginning. We developed a lot in terms of refining, and we made models, and we went to site a lot, and we mapped out like paths to make sure it worked. And the little team that was on the job, we all fell in love with the different trees that were there as well. So there was an octopus one that was like, not an octopus, cool, but felt like an octopus. There's so many figs, and they had different levels of health, and they had different characters, even though they're the same species, because some points they were on top of pure sand, because this was basically sand at one point, and some bits had better soil. But we just responded to each of those. Like, it was like they were family. And then that kind of directed us as to how to look after them. Like, do we want a path to go past this, or do we need to protect that edge? Each of these things were set up, like you said, kind of from an imagination that said, what would it be like to be here, and what would be the best experience? And if I was shy, where would I go? And if I was extroverted, what would I do? But it doesn't, apart from one big slide and a water feature, it doesn't have swings, and it doesn't have multiple off-the-shelf things and twirly things, etc. But it always shocks me. There's
Can I
always,
cut you off there?
yeah.
Why not? Why don't we have the swings? Why don't we have the twirly cool things that make you want to throw up?
because we've already got them, and this is such a special, like, when you're a mum, you've got multiple options for parks, and a council can provide that. The easiest way to do a playground is to pick some off the shelf equipment and then arrange it in a slightly artful way, and you can do that. What we don't often have is experiences when you're in nature, and when you're immersed in nature, and when you feel like properly the presence of plants, when you hear insects, when you see spiders. They're like, I think we've got a little sign at the front which sort of says, just be ready. You might get a splinter. You might see a spider. There could be, if you're lucky, there could be like a lizard or something. And it's something that increasingly we're all tied to screens, and increasingly at school even they're tied to screens there. Is a bit of a loss, I think. People forget to be in their bodies. They forget, that we're part of a bigger system. So this is a really good chance to enhance kids' lives. But I think parents as well, it just reminds you, you're in a big city, you can't always get to somewhere green. So we tried to make it as green as we could.
I hope you're enjoying this so far. So now we're just going to do a little sneaky segue into the key design elements that inform this play garden and features such as water play.
What sort of past projects did you all do prior to the play garden? And then how did it inform what you chose to do for the play garden?
Yeah, I think there's a few big ones that Aspect's known for. Pyramid Park down by the water in Piedmont is one of them. It's got lovely kind of quite informal, a much smaller play space. And the big one is in Darling Harbour, which is a massive water play space which transformed Darling Harbour. And actually we've recently done an extension to it. So there's a new play kind of climbing, creative, inspirational sort of imaginative play space. That's an extension to that. So they're the two big ones, but many small ones as well. And I think, like, as designers, we're observers, and many people have kids, so we just watch. And to be honest, most of us remember as well. Like, we're just a bit silly sometimes. So we sort of, if it is going to be fun for us, it probably will be fun for most people. So it's, a lot of it's about imagining what could be curious and what could be different. That was the big thing. What's different to what you experience all the time.
So what do you think the common trends between the projects that you have done in observing, which by the way, I love it. There's so much power in observing people and looking at their behaviors to begin with, to see actually what they gravitate towards. If you see that 10 kids flocking towards one particular thing, you're pretty certain that it's going to work if you put it into your own space. But what sort of things did you actually observe them doing and went, okay, this is really good, we have to include this?
Well, I mean, I think it's that, right? You got the big things as well. Like, the big things are reasonably obvious. Water play with a kid, if they can control the water, that is absolute gold. If there's an unpredictable nature to it as well, like they've got to preemptively think about, will I be here? Will I get wet? Those things are absolute winners, and I don't actually think you can beat water play in an environment like Sydney where it's hot. And I do think, being able to get a kid totally soaked in a way that's free, that isn't the beach, is incredible for a bunch of parents who are, maybe in an apartment all day, for example. So I think that's gold. But the other thing is a more subtle thing, which is about empathy for them and what they're feeling, and would this be a little bit scary if you were two? And what would I do if and so it's definitely watching the hits, but you need to kind of watch them when they're not so sure as well, the timid ones. So
when you say empathy, you mean
understanding, trying to understand what a kid is feeling when they don't want to climb the big structure. Because there's so many different types of people, and children aren't any different. Making sure that you really think about giving everyone something to do.
Yeah, wow. It's not often, and I feel like the audience would also be in my position where we just go, oh, wow. Like, you just see a structure and you go, that makes sense. And you don't really question it, and you don't really look too deeply into the thought and deep intention that made it exist in the first place. So even when you were saying to control the water, so we're talking about something like that autonomy and that ability to actually make something or make it disappear. Is that what you're
yeah and also to either do this with friends or to suddenly the one in Darling Harbour is pretty great, and most of Sydney siders will know it because they've either had a little kid or now probably a teenager who's been there at some point in their time. But it's got a whole series of different weirs, and you can work by yourself to affect that. But even better, you can collaborate with like 5 little dudes who are also there. So before you know it, they're working in a little team, okay? Pushing or pulling, or someone's, trying to sabotage it all. But they kind of, to have control over that is pretty incredible. So there's that version, which is, you need quite a lot of water to make that happen. And water is expensive and it's precious, and you have to filter it, and it's, and then you have to clean the filters. There's a lot of stuff that's involved in that. So you don't often get that volume of water play happening. But then the sort of more manageable version is just the jets that go off. But if they do it in a way that, maybe they've got a rhythm to them or something. We've done another one in Bankstown, another playground, which has just got jets. It's a much smaller budget. It's kind of lovely patterned ground plane that uses funky Federation style tiles, and it's got a great pattern, but it just, pops up and down, and kids just love to go, where should I be standing next? Oh my God, it's coming. It's over there now. It's like this unpredictable thing as well. So
true. There is just so much to consider. And going back to then the wild play garden, where I could assume that you would be designing everything to the T, including the width of the path. And thinking what are we facilitating here? And even to that, I mean, maybe we could use that as an example. When you were even just deciding the width of the path, I found that it was very wheelchair accessible, which is a huge plus and so inclusive. What other things were you considering in terms of just the space?
I mean, that path, so the path is an important element. So as I said, it's quite steep, really, the change in levels across the site, and that is brilliant because you don't often get that to play with. But one of the challenges is then you have to make it accessible, and you want to, and it's not just for people in wheelchairs. It's like families coming with prams, and the elderly and grandmas and grandpas who are coming with little kids and things. Like, there's a whole level of accessibility that you want there, but we don't want to make it just a boring path. So it becomes a feature, and it connects so many of these elements as it runs down through the site and sort of eventually turns into a little deck. So it's, even those things like it's quite a simple concrete path. To the side of it is a little dish drain, and that captures water, and that water feeds to what we called the dry creek bed. And as you go down this path, eventually when you hit the timber boardwalk, everything sounds different. You get that all of this stuff. Journeys are really important. How you move through a space is really important to how you feel about being there. So lots of thought about that. Lots of thought about how the plants will feel. So as you go past that prehistoric planting at the top, and you turn around to the left, there are massive boulders in front of you, and you can hear water. So just sort of changing Like suddenly this thing which will be cold when it's a cold day and it hasn't hit sun yet, but warm after it's had a lot of sun on it, changes the way that you feel about a space. So it's kind of it's discovery to just understand the space, but then every in a different season it feels completely different as well. So thinking about all those things, trying to make sure there's shade. It does get very hot, and you want to protect people through that space.
What it sounds like also is that there is really a narrative in the garden. I mean, you could start at not to say that there is a beginning chapter and an ending chapter, but it does sound like there are almost different adventures that you could take, and therefore different like highs and lows that you could go on, and then rest, recuperate, and then get back out there. When we're looking at that from a child's perspective, because and things that you mentioned before, collaboration, experimentation, what are the main skills that we're trying to really cultivate? We've got the curiosity too. Is there anything else that we're missing?
For me, it's actually really important to teach kids about the importance of, I don't know if it is design or just the effect of space on how you feel, your psychology. I don't think they'll understand it, but they will remember it, because when you ask people about significant times in their life or where you were when, you're the happiest, a lot of people do talk about external spaces as the thing that resonates. So in my head, when I'm designing these spaces, I'm hoping that this becomes one of those for whoever it is. Yeah.
To clarify then, you mean being able to recognize when a space has affected you and to recognize, I guess, the differences in feeling in response to those different environments?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's probably not written in the list of pedagogical aims, like
not to worry, Louise. No one's checking on us.
but I kind of think, balance, yes, of course, ability to climb, different motor skills, all that stuff, of course. Like these things happen. They kind of happen as a result of living and crossing the road, So it's how do you do that in a more joyful way is maybe what we're thinking about. Like, how do you, I quite like it when kids you can see them. My son, when he first went across, and it was only, I don't know, he was little when it was finished. When he first went across the bridge, he was always a bit timid. So he went across the bridge and was like, oh, I don't know about this. And I was like, oh my God, I don't know about this. That looks scary. Is he going to be okay? And then I think it took 2 times, and then he was like, yeah, and then belting across it. Like I really enjoy seeing the transition in character, through sort of just an experimentation with being alive and being in space. So yeah, look, there's a lot of rules, there's a lot of things that you're aiming to do, but you could probably tick off a lot of those things by getting an off-the-shelf product kind of thing. That's important, and it definitely has a role, and not every project can be special, but because this one could be, we're obliged to make it as special as we possibly could.
Drawing back to the joyful element, I think joy is possibly one of the most underrated, I guess, characteristics as we grow up. Joy, silliness, fun, they tend not to be our priorities anymore, but when we think of children, we think of that. And what it sounds like when you were saying with the design element, which, by the way, is the first time I've ever heard someone say that as a key characteristic that we want to develop, but I am so on board, and I'm going to use this now, Louise. I'm taking it. I'm really taking this idea, because it sounds like just a general sense of appreciation and being able to be in tune with the connection between space and your body and being able to appreciate how that feels in your body.
Yeah.
Which is then just drawing back to a sense of self and a sense of reflection, almost, you could say.
Yeah. And even sharing, like just sharing with others, the joy. I think it is one of those severely underrated things that people maybe have hooked onto a little bit when they say, during COVID, I loved my morning walks. But then I look around and I see a city which could be a hell of a lot better, and I think, wouldn't it be great if everyone appreciated design a bit more? And this is a really kind of fun way to try and introduce it to little minds who will one day be big minds, and even I think parents as well. You know, big minds are fed through these little creatures teach you a hell of a lot. You know, it's actually really fun when you have kids because you suddenly like, I can go and do all these weird things. I can sing songs out loud. I don't sing songs. That's not what I do. This is weird. So they kind of, through their curiosity, educate you to be a bit more curious as well. So
Completely.
It's a bit of a gift.
And when you're saying little kids, so the target audience, would you say is roughly around toddler to maybe mid-primary, or is there even a target audience?
It usually is, and I think that probably is about it, which is, you know, in some way you just made me realize we should do another project which is about teens and planting, because that obviously they're incredibly neglected, I think.
Oh, we need to talk, Louise, this will be another episode. You're not going to get rid of me yet. We're going to do another one.
Yeah, the key audience. I mean, little kids absolutely love the water, so they will just come and they will sit, even in their nappies, just in a puddle, just happily forever. Hopefully not in their nappies, but then maybe to kind of 12, 13, you might get a 14-year-old with a couple of little brothers and sisters turning up. But yeah, no, it's a good point. It's not just a basic sport experience, you know. It seems like you graduate from creative play and then it's sport.
I agree. I think of literally comparing a primary school to a secondary school. The play equipment just disappears somehow. And then by year 7, you're expected to sit on the ground and sort of just eat your lunch. And then what you do is you just talk, which is great. You're connecting. But the idea of being or having the permission to be exploring in your environment and everything just changes. The relationship definitely changes. I'd be very curious to hear how you would develop the play and the fun of older teens, for sure, because there is scope, but it's not talked about at all.
Well, maybe it's teen and adults. I look, as I'm saying this, I'm thinking, well, you know, we haven't really been asked to do that yet. But I am thinking of my son's school, which is he's kind of lucky. It's on this, again, steep site, right? Steep sites are tricky, and because of that, they become interesting. So if you got a flat site, often not much happens. It's all very laid out for you, and there you go, it's over. It's a steep site, and it's a state school, and it's not in its prime, and it's kind of excellently like a decaying landscape that sort of trickles down the side of the hill. So I think by default, and in some ways we kind of decided that was the school for him because we liked the vibe in the playground, and it was just like, it does feel a bit like a lost ruin or something. It's just probably not something people have thought about a lot, and certainly, you know, in education it's really hard to find money to do extra things. True. I think it's super worthwhile.
Yeah, we'll make it happen.
Okay, I'll leave it to you. You get me a gig, I'll be there.
Awesome. Yeah. And with this trend of what I'm hearing, because from the story about your son, you know, trialing that what was it, the bridge and running across and being a bit daunted, I nearly slipped, Louise. I will say
I feel like I nearly slipped too. I'm like, who designed this? Shut up, Louise. You did.
Who would have done such a thing? So when I was walking along, and I was actually a bit nervous. It was also a rainy day, so I was trying to be a bit sensible, and I nearly slipped and was thinking, this is really great in terms of being able to reflect, do immediate reflection and go, okay, that was not so good for my body. Maybe I should adjust. And which I could imagine kids would be doing all the time. That was an intentional decision, wasn't it?
Yeah. That's what play is. Play is, I think I talked to you before about this. The Australian standards have a great introduction. So for people who don't know, there's a whole bunch of standards that are used to determine if they think a playground is safe or not. And then there are play certifiers who use the standard, or most of the cases they've written half of the standard as well, to determine if they think it is safe. And anyone who's my age or older will remember there was a time when playgrounds had nothing in them because councils decided that they were all too dangerous, and we used to have swings that were absolutely enormous and not much softball, and it was brilliant. So there's all these standards that determine what's considered safe or not, but in the introduction to the play standard, it specifically says that risk is part of play. Risk in a safe environment is, it can't be that safe. It has, they're not trying to stop you breaking your arm. They're trying to stop you, being seriously injured. So managing the climbing across of something which feels a bit scary is how your brain develops. It's how you, learn to reason. What is fair? What can my body do? What can't it do? It's how you learn to balance. It's, you can't do life without risk. And playgrounds are kind of just this sort of more joyful space to test boundaries. And it's also, I think it's kind of special because it feels like it is a kid's space. Most other spaces, children are visitors too, except for their bedroom. They're kind of like, yes, you're allowed to come shopping if you behave yourself. You're allowed to, be at the dinner table, whatever. All these things like an event, or they come as well as, but I feel like play spaces should feel like they're owned by children and the parents are visiting. It's one of the few spaces where you get that.
Completely agree. The idea of autonomy, of independence, of a responsibility, because kids are never really given responsibilities that take control of their own lives. They're always, what you were saying, following someone. I guess that's why you get all those kids with their sticks and they're like, over there, and then they order the kids around and it's their space, like what you would see in a playground too. Yeah. But with that idea of balance, though, of literal balancing between risk and play, like how do we, it's so subtle almost. How do we end up doing that and being able to facilitate both?
Risk and play. It's just the same thing, is it not? I don't know. Like, play is a step into the unknown, isn't it? Like, often the best play is, you might have some rules around it, but it's pretty. The whole point is you don't know where it's going to end. That's why it's fun. So I don't know if there are rules like this. I'm making light of it, but there are a bunch of crazy tools and strangely formed things which mimic a child's head that the play certifiers will shove into different holes to make sure that they can't get caught. So all that stuff happens so that you don't have to worry about it. But I think it's good when it feels a bit risky. That's the whole point. Like a kid's learning, can I walk on this? I don't know. I'll try. I'll hold mum's hand the first time. Maybe I went the third time. It's all about that kind of, it's a step into the unknown.
And it really does feel like it. It really does feel like, and I love that challenge, by the way, Louise, because I'm starting to really consider that, given I'm not really in the primary space, and play, unfortunately so, is not really the area that I really think about, even though it sustains, my character. And again, something not considered in my life usually for children. And I believe I'm talking more about the OH&S. Which is more.
When does a risk become too risky? Yeah,
exactly. Because we have to follow the standards. Yeah. But then the standards are sort of like, how do you even manage a tight standard? Because it could be one way, but then it could be the other.
Yeah. So, like, there's a lot of really specific things about the standards. For example, the full attenuation, the soft stuff that's under your feet. Not in we have a little bit in wild play, but not much. Mostly it's mulch, so you can do it in many ways. You can have a particular type of mulch, you can have a particular type of sand, you can have softball. So all of those things are defined, and if you're building something which is high and you can fall off it, there are rules about how soft it should be underfoot. For example, it's really hard. You could I mean, a very, very dexterous person might be able to climb on the outside of that big structure. And there are sort of assumptions that if a person is that dexterous, then they will be okay. Little kids couldn't, like we designed it so you couldn't get onto the outside of the structure. So if you're climbing, although it feels dangerous and you're inside the sort of bird's nest, it feels dangerous, but you're completely enclosed. So you could fall, you could hurt something, but you're not going to fall right to the ground, even though you're, I think, 7 meters in the air. It's quite high.
Pretty high.
Okay. I mean, that's the beauty. There's that. There's the rules. And if you're doing anything slightly different to the rules, and even if you aren't, we will always get a play certifier, which is a person who will look at the playground, test it. So they usually work with you when you're designing it. You'll get a couple of reviews. We're designing a massive playground in Bradfield for Bradfield Central Park, which is a new sort of city, basically, which is near the new airport in Western Sydney. And we've gone through quite an elaborate design process for that, and built all 3D models and things. But in that process, you talk to the play certifier, they'll say, oh, look, I think actually that angle's a bit too steep, or, you know, you need a bit more softfall here, or, yeah, that's okay, Louise, but the weave needs to be tighter, that kind of thing. Like, you get quite constructive feedback. They do that, and then you keep going, and then they review it again. Like, if you're doing your job properly, they'll review it again. And then when it's built, or when it's being built, they'll often do 1 or 2 visits. Certainly when it's absolutely finished, they come, and with these crazy tools that look like small children's heads and fingers and things, they poke them in holes and see if they're going to get hurt.
Oh, so my God, that's a job. You know, when I have my students sort of, I teach like the kids, you're 18 or older, and they're really stressed out about their job prospects. I could just go, hey, have you considered this job?
You know, there's not many of them, so it's not about, I mean, I think you'd want to check the insurance situation quite well, but and then, you know, there's sort of rules about, like, for example, if it's a forced movement, so if you're going down a slippery dip, you have to be careful that toggles on hats and clothes won't get caught in something on the way down. So you'll notice that most slides have a big sort of sheath around them before you go in. So all of those things are for reasons. But I think the good thing is there was a point where they took all the danger away, and then you just ended up with empty spaces. Now there's kind of rules, and I think a pretty reasonable approach to managing risk that means that you can do a whole lot more. And councils are willing to do that, you know, because that's the other thing. You have to have a client who's willing to go, okay, there is some risk involved. And Centennial Parklands were great with that. They were like, yes, we understand it will be a bit riskier.
Because I can definitely see that in terms of, you know, the kids are going to, if they're used to something, they'll run across it faster. They're going to access something different. There's always ways to approach something. It's almost impossible to not have any. I think it's impossible to not have any risk anywhere. Even if you had no structure, you'd still probably trip on the ground with something. To see that it's facilitated so well in this space, and for it to be quite intentional, as it has to be within a play garden, but to be able to facilitate that and go, we expect you to take risks, is really, really beautiful. And with the structure, I'm imagining the one with the tunnel and the one with the bridge, thinking about the materials that you've used, because what we see in general playgrounds, very plastic based, the standard playground. I noticed wood in yours. I noticed steel and that. So what informed that idea?
Look, I think I just have an absolute affinity with timber structures, and I've done a bunch of them, but this one, you know, it's just one that I think worked quite well. It was fun to construct, it was fun to make models of and think about how it might join together, and it was really good to work with fabricators who were happy to try something a bit different there. So the way that the nest is constructed, for example, is there would be many engineers who would have said no, you cannot do that. So it was great to work with Forge and figure out how to get that built together. I think it's an affront. It's just offensive to children to throw plastic at them all over the place. Like, one of those things. And when I'm talking about the education of kids to the value of design, like if you go to a contemporary school and there's no blackboards, there are all whiteboards, and there's carpet on the floor, and all of the desks are covered in plastic. I actually feel that, like, that hurts me, that is how these kids are being raised. Like, they have no understanding of a natural material and how it feels and how it ages and even how it sounds. So it's one of our obligations as designers to help to show kids what a natural material is. And yeah, occasionally they might get a splinter, and that will also teach them to be more careful, or to, I think you have an empathy for natural materials that you often don't have for synthetic ones. We did have a moment, we designed that structure, and there was a moment where it was maybe going to be too expensive, and there was a moment when a supplier was contacted to see if they could do something almost the same but in steel, and they thought they could, and what they gave us was nothing like it. And thankfully the client realized it was nothing like it, and in the end it would have cost more anyway. So it's one of those things that I will always fight for timber, because it's just a sort of magic material.
It really does show and does feel so special when you do see, I mean, it mimics its environment perfectly. In saying that, I mean, if you had a plastic tube that just sort of went down and you had all these beautiful trees around it that was shrouded and magical, it would be really disjointed. From seeing that, the structure was genuinely so beautiful. I wish that anyone who's around that area, or even, from Melbourne and going just for a holiday, could go and experience it, because it makes you take a step back and really just focus on where you are in that present moment.
Yeah,
and that
is
really
great to hear.
Yeah, that's you really going, potentially tripping while you're going to the beautiful structures.
Yeah, so careful.
Yeah, but I realise we're sort of going a bit over time. So I'm going to end this with a few rapid fires, few little questions to wrap up what is a beautiful topic, and one that I really love nerding out with you, Louise. And we probably will in our second chapter of the teen play garden.
It sounds like fun. It's been a good chat.
Yeah. Okay, first rapid fire. Your personal favourite part of the wild garden?
Look, I have to say the nest, the bird's nest, the structure, because I put a lot of my soul into that. But I love it mostly because it's also nestled in bamboo. And it just feels, it's like a little lost wonderland.
And second, you were talking about the senses and what it creates in the child. Is there a particular sense that the play garden really, really gets you to embody and channel? I know there's a combination, but is there one in particular that you think it does?
I don't know if it's a sense, but I think it just slows me down. You kind of forget time. So maybe sound. I could probably say sound. Because I feel like sometimes I feel alone. I'm like, oh my God, that sounded incredible. Did you hear the casuarinas? And I'm like, no one else is saying that. Why isn't anyone else saying that? But, maybe I'm just super sensitive to it. But I do love the way a leaf sounds. And I kind of love also that nobody realizes they notice it, but they definitely feel it.
In terms of play structures, and it could be garden related, but it could just be a play structure that aspect has not been a part of, but something that you've noticed or are very impressed by, does any particular one come to mind?
Oh goodness. See, I can compliment aspect before I was at aspect.
Then let's bring an aspect. Let's do aspect.
So it's one of the ones I've spoken about that wasn't my personal project, but I think has like the one at Darling Harbour, I think changed the game. I love that it transformed how kids can access free water play in the city. It did it before anyone else did.
Right.
Invited, because you used to, if you lived in the western suburbs, to go to the beach in Sydney is a bloody big hike. Go to Darling Harbour is a manageable thing.
So after we'd filmed this, Louise came back and sent me the Rio Tinto Naturescape Kings Park and said it's exceptionally designed, huge and nature-based, and that the images on the website did not do it justice. And if you're in Perth, it's a must-see. So, just saying.
And lastly, we did talk about this, so I'm going to veto your favourite answer, which would have been, my question is, what skill, and when I say skill, it is perhaps a belief or a mindset of children that you believe is severely underrated or something that you really want to nurture. We did talk about the sense of environment to self, but is there anything else that comes to mind?
Just their openness, their curiosity. Like, I will never stop being in awe of a little kid who, like a baby, when babies look, you're like, wow, they're really seeing. And I think as you get older, the eyes can get a bit frosty and jaded. And so that.
Thank you so much for jumping on, Louise.
It's a pleasure.